So I'm curious, have you ever really loved doing something until the point where you started measuring it, like measuring how well you were doing it? So Nick Jonas of the Jonas Brothers, and they're on tour now, he recently talked about a period in his career when he would walk onto stage, and instead of seeing the people who came to see him, like instead of seeing the audience full, he was picking out the empty seats. Think about that. Like he was doing something that he had loved since he was a kid. But somewhere along the way, performing stopped really being about the music and giving something that he loved to do. And it started becoming about measuring things like how many people came, how big was the venue, how successful was the tour, like was he successful? And then with time, Nick realized something that I think actually applies to all of us, which is why I want to talk about this, is if you spend enough time looking at those empty seats, like what's not working, what's missing, what you haven't done, eventually you forget to really appreciate the people who did show up. Stop seeing and experiencing the things that are working in your life. So today I want to look at what happened to Nick Jonas and how that realization actually helped him rediscover something that he thought he might have totally lost, okay? Because you don't have to be a musician, and we're using the metaphor of empty seats. Maybe yours is customers, right, who didn't call, or contracts you didn't get, or friends who stopped showing up, the promotion that you wanted and it went somewhere else, or a relationship that didn't work out, or simply a life that isn't what you thought it would be by now. So if you've ever found yourself paying more attention to what's missing than to what you actually have, than what's really present, then hang with me, because Nick actually found his way back, and I think that it's an interesting story to follow. And I find that what happened along the way helps us see that there's something in his experience that might help us look differently at our own experiences. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about. Hi, I'm Leezá Steindorf, and for more than 30 years, I've worked with Fortune 500 companies and government organizations, communities, and individuals around the world, helping people navigate communication and conflict and change. And one thing that I've noticed is that we all need feedback. Like we need to know what we're putting out in the world has an impact. We need information that tells us whether something's working. Not a problem with that at all. But the trouble begins when we turn that information into a verdict about ourselves, where we use that as evidence to judge ourselves. And usually those judgments are negative. That's exactly what happened to Nick Jonas. So he'd been performing since he was a child, literally. He was on Broadway. He was part of the Jonas Brothers, as I said, right? He had his own solo career. He also did acting. He filled arenas, and he put out numerous albums, and he's been on tour, like the whole shebang of a successful musician. So if you imagine how many different ways that someone with that career could possibly measure themselves, there's a lot, right? Album sales, how many streams on the platforms, where he is in the charts, how many tickets have been sold for the concerts, what size the audience is. And I think that's a strange thing about what we call success, what we've come to title as success. The more successful you become, the more scoreboards people give you. So the focus shifts from what you're bringing, the gifts you're bringing, what people are excited about in you and about you. Then it becomes about counting numbers, because the numbers are the indicators. So Nick's talked about reaching this point where he was actually performing solo, and he became so preoccupied with the seats that were empty. And I find that just fascinating, because the seats weren't actually taking anything away from his experience, right? And they weren't taking anything away from the people who were sitting there. So they weren't making the music worse, or they weren't changing his ability to perform. But his focus on those empty seats were absolutely changing his experience of performing. I find that fascinating, because something can be perfectly meaningful and begin to feel insufficient simply because we've changed our perspective. We're looking at it from a different viewpoint. And we do that all the time. Like you can have 10 people, let's say you give a presentation, and there's 10 people in the room, and 9 people come and they're like, oh my gosh, that was so amazing. But one person, for whatever reason, didn't like it. Most people are going to focus on the one, not the 9, right? So you can accomplish those 9 things and spend the whole evening thinking about the last one. And you can have a room like this guy full of people who chose you, who wanted to be there, and still only see the empty chairs. And why? Why are the empty seats, why are the things that aren't working for us so much easier to see than the full ones, than the things that really are showing up for us? And the reason is that what is missing can get very loud. It's where we put our focus, where we put our attention. And many of us have been trained to look for what's wrong, what isn't working, what needs fixing, what's missing. And we come to believe that finding the problem is going to motivate us to make things better. Like if we just figure out why that one person had the problem or why the 5 seats were empty, then we're going to be able to fix it so it's going to always be 100%. First of all, I don't think that works. But there's another way to look at it that I think is a lot juicier, that feeds us more. That is, we can notice what is working, what's already here, what we value and want more of, what we're already accomplishing and what we've already brought to the world. Because when our attention becomes fixed on what's missing, then that thing that's missing actually takes up all the oxygen in the room. It feels more important than actually what's present. And Nick eventually recognized that. He recognized that he was focusing on those empty seats and what that was doing to him. Like he wasn't just evaluating ticket sales. He was allowing the ticket sales, the numbers, to determine how he felt about his own performance. Like it was the other way around. And those are 2 different things. One is you're having an experience and you have feedback as to how that's arriving. And the other one is you're looking at that feedback and that's going to determine your experience. So if you're running a business, you have to know whether people are buying, obviously, right? And if you're making music professionally, you also know ticket sales matter. And if you're trying to improve something, you need that feedback so you can change things and tweak, and right, all performers or even athletes or just students, whatever, we receive feedback. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I can see that. I didn't notice that. And that helps us. I'm not suggesting that we don't need any scoreboard or any feedback, or that it doesn't exist. Not at all. But what I am suggesting is that we stop looking at those numbers, looking at that scoreboard for information that it actually can't provide. Like a ticket count can tell, like Nick Jonas, how many people came to the concert, right? But it can't tell him whether he should still love making music or how people felt about the music. Like your salary can tell you what your employer pays you. That's factual. But it can't tell you what you're worth. And what do they call that? Your followers, right? Your social media numbers. They can tell you how many people clicked on a video clip or what have you, but they can't tell you whether you created something that mattered. And when we confuse those things, then it's very easy that something we actually really once loved can become something that we dread or we kind of drag ourselves through doing. So if the numbers can't give us the answers that feed us, that give us direction, then where do we find those answers? And that's part of Nick's story that I really love. So his way forward wasn't simply sell more tickets. It was reconnecting with what had been there before he started counting them. Like what he loved was the music and the performing and connecting with the people in the audience and the joy that he felt when he was on stage. And then when that was what he focused on, when that is what he brought into his view, not the empty seats, but wow, this is here, then he found himself wanting to tour again. And that's super important. I think that's an incredibly important distinction, because the circumstances can give you permission to feel joy first. He remembered the joy first. And then he changed his circumstances. Then he went out and he started touring again. And I think there's something in that story for all of us, actually. So if you think, just try this out. think about something that you used to love doing. Maybe you're not doing it anymore, or maybe you're not doing it with the same enthusiasm. And before you had a measure, before you thought you should be doing it a certain way, or before somebody else was taking note of it, or you were getting evaluated on it, or what have you, before you knew whether you were supposed to be good at it or not, and whether somebody was noticing, before it became that part of your identity or your income or your reputation, think about why you actually started. Like, what was it that turned you on? What excited you? And I find that question is not only clarifying, it's incredibly inspiring. Because when we come back to why we started or why we're doing something, we access a part of ourselves that literally revs our engines. And so sometimes we don't need a new purpose, right? We don't have to go and find ourselves again. We can simply remember what mattered to us before we started checking the boxes and looking at the feedback and filling the seats, so to speak. And that brings us back to that metaphor. There's always going to be empty seats. There's always going to be things that we didn't do well, that wasn't quite good enough. Like I do woodwork, for example. I love doing woodwork. And when I got to a point where I started making some lamps, and I was looking how other people were doing it, and I first started out just doing it on my own, what I thought was great, right? And I was just trying it out. And then I started realizing, you need to do it this way and that way, and the measurements and the width and the height and the finishing and the electrical, all these things. I was like, and it became a chore. It's like, phew, that's no fun. So I went back to, okay, I am totally excited about this piece of wood or this piece of driftwood or this shape or this grain or whatever it is. And I think I'll make a lamp out of it. So to come back to that which really inspires you, because there's always going to be something to compare it to. There's always going to be those empty seats, like with Nick Jonas, or someone who doesn't understand you, or something you didn't complete the way you wanted to or didn't achieve, someone doing it better, right? All the opportunities that come and then they go without us being able to take advantage of them. So your life could have had a different version, but you're here today, and you can spend your life trying to create what you think it should have been. But first of all, you can't do that. And secondly, you're never going to finish that occupation because you don't know what it could have been. But you can turn your attention to what's here now. And that sounds so simple. And maybe it is simple. Maybe it's not easy. Maybe it's simple but not easy. But when we do it, it's powerful. Simple but powerful, right? When we look at what's working, what is present, what can I do, what matters that I still bring to the table. And you look at the part of you that wanted to do this before anyone was paying attention, before you got paid for it, before you put the final finish on it, right? And Nick Jonas, he didn't need every seat filled before he fell in love with performing again. Like he just stopped looking at the empty seats and decided what performing meant to him. And it could have been the possibility he would have said, it's really not my thing anymore. Okay, maybe he would have gone in a different direction. But what he found when he stopped measuring himself, comparing himself, holding himself to a particular standard, he found his joy again. So maybe that's a question worth taking with you today. Where have you become so focused on what's not working, on those empty seats, that you've forgotten the joy of showing up for yourself? Just think about that. Because I think that fulfillment isn't learning how to do it perfectly, how to fill those seats. It's learning not to let the mishaps, the empty seats, the things that you didn't get, decide whether you want to show up and whether it's worth showing up and doing what you love to do. And it doesn't have to be something you're hugely passionate about, just something you enjoy. So if there's an empty seat that you've been paying too much attention to lately, tell me about it in the comments. I really enjoy reading through them. We have a beautifully thoughtful community growing here, and it's growing slowly and thoughtfully, which I also appreciate. And if these conversations help you look at your own life a little differently, please subscribe. I'd love to have you join me in the different conversations, because we look at things, events, behaviors, life experiences that impact us all, and what's underneath, what moves us. What can we learn from it? How can we be inspired? Okay? So I think it's important and it's helpful to remember that it's not that we need more acknowledgement. It's remembering why we started before anyone was watching and touching that excitement within ourselves, that energy within ourselves. So I want to thank you for listening. I hope you'll join me next time. Until then, be well.